I still remember the exact shade of blue the sky turned. The day war came to our village, not the sharp, clean blue of summer mornings, but a dull, heavy grey blue, like the color of wet slate just before it cracks. I was 9 years old, standing barefoot in the dew-damp grass behind our cottage, watching smoke curl from the chimney of Mr. Harrow's forge. It was early, so early the roosters hadn't even bothered to crow yet, and the air smelled of damp earth and last night's rain. I remember thinking even then that something was wrong. Not because of any sound or sight, but because of the silence. The birds had stopped singing. Not one sparrow, not one blackbird. Just that thick waiting quiet, like the whole world had taken a breath and forgotten to let it out. My name is Elias Finch. I was born in a hamlet so small it didn't appear on most maps, just a cluster of stone cottages huddled around a crooked church steeple, nestled in the folds of the Cotswolds like a secret. My father was a carpenter. My mother grew roses that smelled like heaven and baked bread that could make a hungry man weep. We weren't rich, but we were full of laughter, full of stories, full of the kind of ordinary magic that only children notice. The way sunlight caught in the dust above the kitchen table, the creak of the attic floorboards when the wind blew just right, the sound of my sister humming as she braided her hair by the window. Lena. She was 12 then, tall for her age, with eyes the color of storm clouds and a laugh that could lift your heart right out of your chest. She used to say I talked to the sky more than I did to people. And maybe she was right. I'd lie in the meadow behind the old mill for hours, watching clouds drift like slow ships across an endless sea, whispering questions into the wind. Not prayers exactly, more like conversations. I'd ask the sky why the leaves turned gold in autumn, or whether stars ever got lonely. And sometimes, just sometimes, it felt like it answered. Not in words, of course, but in the rustle of branches, the distant call of a lark, the sudden warmth of sun on my cheek when the clouds parted. That was enough. The first real sign that war had found us wasn't bombs or soldiers. It was paper. Thin, official-looking letters began arriving in brown envelopes, stamped with red seals. Mrs. Pembroke down the lane got one. Her son was in the Royal Navy. She didn't cry when she read it. She just stood very still in her doorway, clutching the letter to her chest like it might vanish if she let go. Then she went inside and closed the curtains. We didn't see her for 3 days. Then came the blackout. One evening, without warning, every lamp in the village went dark. Not just dimmed, extinguished. The blackout blinds went up on every window, thick and heavy as theater curtains. Even the moon seemed to hide behind clouds that night, as if ashamed to witness what was coming. Father nailed strips of wood over our windows, muttering about keeping the light in and the danger out. Mother lit a single candle and placed it in the center of the table, its flame trembling like a heartbeat. That night, for the first time, I heard the sky make a sound I didn't recognize, a low, distant drone, like 1,000 bees trapped in a jar. Lena grabbed my hand under the table. Her palm was cold. The next morning, soldiers arrived. Not marching, not shouting, just appearing, as if they'd grown overnight like mushrooms after rain. They set up camp in the old field beyond the church, their tents neat and grey as gravestones. They didn't speak much to us children, but they'd nod politely when we passed, their eyes tired in a way I didn't understand yet. One of them, a young corporal with a chipped front tooth and a pocket watch that never worked, gave me a boiled sweet once. For keeping quiet, he said, winking. I kept that sweet in my pocket for weeks, long after it had melted into a sticky lump. I liked the idea that kindness could be carried like a stone in your pocket, small, solid, always there. School changed. Miss Thorne stopped teaching us about Roman emperors and started drilling us on gas masks and evacuation routes. We practiced putting on our masks in the schoolyard, the rubber straps pinching our ears, the smell of stale rubber and fear thick in our nostrils. I hated the way it muffled sound, how it turned my own breath into a wet, echoing whisper. Lena said it made us look like ghosts. Maybe she was right. Then came the evacuees. Children from London, pale and thin as pencil lines, clutching cardboard suitcases and stuffed animals with button eyes. Some cried. Some didn't speak at all. We were told to be kind, to share our toys, our beds, our bread. I remember one boy, Thomas, his name was, standing in our doorway, his shoes too big, his hair cropped close to his scalp. He wouldn't look anyone in the eye. Mother knelt and took his hand. "You're safe here," she said softly. He flinched. That night, I heard him crying in the spare room, a sound so quiet it was almost silent, just the occasional hitch of breath, like a clock winding down. I started talking to the sky more after that. "Not just questions, please. Keep them safe," I'd whisper, staring up at the stars. "Keep us all safe." And the sky, in its vast, indifferent way, would shimmer back full of light but saying nothing. Winter came early that year. Frost painted the windows in delicate ferns, and the wind howled through the eaves like a lost thing. Father worked longer hours, repairing wagons for the army, his hands raw and cracked. Mother rationed sugar so carefully it felt like we were counting grains of sand. Lena stopped humming. She spent her evenings mending socks by lamplight, her face shadowed, her fingers moving fast and sure. I'd watch her sometimes, wondering what she was thinking, wondering if she too felt the world shrinking around us, like a noose tightening with every passing day. One afternoon, I found her sitting on the roof of the barn, her coat pulled tight around her shoulders, staring at the horizon. I climbed up beside her, careful not to slip on the frost-slick tiles. For a long while, neither of us spoke. Then she said, so softly I almost missed it, "Do you think they can see us from up there? The pilots, I mean. Do you think they look down and see our village and think, that's just a dot? That's nothing." I didn't know what to say. So I reached into my pocket and pulled out a smooth river stone I'd been carrying for weeks, grey, cool, shaped by time and water. I pressed it into her hand. "We're not nothing," I said. She closed her fingers around it and smiled, a small, sad thing, but real. "No," she said. "We're not." That night the drone returned, louder this time, closer. I lay awake in bed, listening to the hum grow, then fade, then grow again, like a beast circling just beyond the hills. Mother came in and sat on the edge of my bed, her hand resting lightly on my forehead. "Sleep, my love," she whispered. The sky is watching, but I couldn't sleep. I slipped out of bed and crept to the window, peeling back the blackout blind, just enough to see a sliver of sky. And there, between the clouds, a single star burned, bright, defiant, impossibly far away. I whispered to it, not a question this time, but a promise. I'll remember, even then. I think I knew that memory would become our only shelter. The next morning, the church bell rang, not the usual Sunday chime, but a long, urgent toll that sent birds scattering from the trees. We gathered in the square, wrapped in coats and worry. The vicar stood on the steps, his face ashen. A telegram had come, not for one family, but for many. Names were called out: Harper, Briggs, Finch, my father's name, my uncle's name. Lena's hand found mine again, tighter this time. They weren't dead, not yet, just gone, sent east, to a place none of us could pronounce. The village exhaled all at once, a collective breath held too long. Relief, yes, but something else too. The dawning understanding that absence could be its own kind of wound. In the days that followed, life went on, but quieter, as if we were all speaking in whispers so as not to wake something sleeping. I helped Mother in the garden, turning the soil for winter crops. Lena took over Father's workshop, sanding wood with a focus that bordered on prayer. And I kept talking to the sky. Not just at night, but in the grey hours of dawn, in the hush of afternoon, in the long silences between meals. I told it about Thomas's first smile, about the way the frost melted into dew on the rose bushes, about how Lena's hands never stopped moving, even when she thought no one was watching. I told it I was afraid, and sometimes, when the wind shifted just right, it felt like the sky leaned down and whispered back, "So am I." But it stayed. It always stayed. Even when the world below it cracked and burned and broke, the sky remained, vast, ancient, holding everything in its silent blue gaze. And in that gaze I found a strange kind of courage. Not the loud, heroic kind you read about in papers, but the quiet kind that lets you plant seeds in winter, mend a torn coat. Hold your sister's hand when the news comes, because even in the darkest hour, someone has to speak to the sky and someone has to listen. The winter deepened, and with it, a new kind of silence settled over the village, not the hush of snow or the pause between breaths, but the quiet of waiting. Waiting for letters that never came, waiting for news that never arrived, waiting for the war to remember us, or forget us, or simply let us be. The postman's bicycle, once a cheerful clatter down the lane, became a source of dread. We'd watch him from windows, hearts thudding like trapped birds, until he passed our gate without stopping. Relief, then shame for feeling it. Someone else's sorrow had been delivered instead. I turned 10 that February. There was no cake. Sugar was too precious, but Mother made a small loaf with dried apple and a single spoonful of honey saved from last summer's hive. Lena carved my name into the crust with the tip of her knife. 10 years old, she said, handing me the slice. Old enough to carry secrets now. I didn't understand what she meant until later, when I found her kneeling in the root cellar, pressing a folded letter into the hollow of an old cider barrel. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. Don't tell anyone, she whispered. Not even Mother, I nodded. I didn't ask whose letter it was. I already knew. Thomas, the boy from London, began to speak. Not in full sentences at first, just single words, dropped like pebbles into still water. Cold. Bread. Sky. He said that last one often, always looking up as if searching for something he'd lost. One afternoon, I found him sitting by the frozen stream, tracing shapes in the ice with a stick. I sat beside him without a word. After a while, he pointed to a crack in the ice that branched like a lightning bolt. Like veins, he murmured. I nodded. We sat there until our fingers went numb, watching the weak sun glint off the frost. That was the day I realized silence wasn't always empty. Sometimes it was full of things too heavy for words. The sky that winter was a study in restraint, pale, washed-out blues and greys, the sun a ghost behind thin cloud. But every now and then, just before dusk, it would flare into something breathtaking, streaks of rose and amber bleeding across the horizon, as if the world were blushing at its own endurance. On those evenings, I'd climb the hill behind the church, the highest point for miles, and lie on my back in the brittle grass, letting the colors wash over me. I'd close my eyes and imagine Father seeing the same sky from wherever he was. Maybe he was looking up too, thinking of home. Maybe he heard me. I started leaving things for him in the sky. Not prayers exactly, offerings. A smooth pebble from the stream. A sprig of dried lavender from Mother's garden. Once a button from my coat that had come loose in the wash. I'd hold them up to the light, whisper a sentence, "This is for you," and let the wind take the words. I never saw the offerings go anywhere, of course. But the act of giving them made the distance feel smaller, like I was stitching a thread between us, one word at a time. Lena began teaching at the village school. Miss Thorne had fallen ill, nerves, they said, and someone had to fill her place. Lena stood at the front of the classroom in Father's old waistcoat, chalk dust on her sleeves, her voice steady, even when her hands shook. She taught the children sums and spelling, but also how to tie knots, how to read a compass, how to stay calm when the air raid siren sounded. Fear is natural, she told them once, but it doesn't have to be the loudest voice in your head. I watched her through the window one afternoon, sunlight catching the gold in her hair, and thought she looked like someone from a story, someone brave, someone who belonged in books. But at night, when she thought I was asleep, I'd hear her crying, soft, muffled sounds, like she was trying to swallow her grief whole. I never went to her, not because I didn't want to, but because I knew she needed to hold it alone, just for a little while. Some burdens can't be shared. They can only be carried, one step at a time. Spring came late and hesitant, as if unsure of its welcome. The first snowdrops pushed through the frost like tiny white fists. Then daffodils, then cherry blossoms, pale and trembling. The world was trying to remember how to bloom. We planted a victory garden in the field behind the church, rows of potatoes, carrots, and cabbage stretching toward the horizon like green stitches in the earth. Thomas helped, his hands clumsy at first, then sure. He didn't speak much, but he smiled more. Sometimes, when no one was looking, he'd press a flower into my palm and walk away without a word. One morning, a letter arrived. Not the thin, official kind, but a real letter. Thick paper, smudged ink, father's handwriting looping across the page like a familiar song. My hands shook so badly I could barely open it. Mother read it aloud by the fire, her voice trembling only once, near the end. He was well. He missed us. He'd seen mountains so high they touched the clouds. He asked about the roses. He asked about me, that night I wrote back. Not with pen and paper, those were rationed too, but with the sky. I lay in the meadow, the grass still damp from rain, and spoke everything I couldn't write. How the stream had thawed, how Thomas had laughed for the first time, how Lena's hands never stopped moving, how I still talked to the stars and sometimes, just sometimes, felt them answer. I told him I was learning to whittle, that I'd made a small bird from a scrap of ashwood, that I kept it in my pocket next to the melted sweet. I'm growing, I said to the dark, but not too fast. I'm waiting for you. The next day, the siren sounded, not a drill, real. We'd practiced this 100 times, down to the cellar, coats on, gas masks ready, no running, no shouting. But nothing prepares you for the sound itself. That rising, keening wail that scrapes your bones clean. It wasn't fear I felt first, but disbelief. Here, in our quiet valley, where cows lowed at dawn and church bells marked the hours. Could war really reach us here? We huddled in the cellar, the four of us, Mother, Lena, Thomas and me, pressed together like pages in a book. The air smelled of damp stone and turnips. Above us the house groaned as if in pain. Then came the sound we'd only heard in drills or distant rumors, the deep, shuddering thump of bombs falling somewhere beyond the hills. Not close, not yet, but close enough to make the earth tremble. Thomas buried his face in Mother's coat. Lena held my hand so tightly it hurt. I closed my eyes and listened, not to the explosions, but to the silence between them. In those gaps, I heard the wind. I heard a bird call impossibly from the orchard. I heard my own breath, steady despite everything. When it was over, we emerged into a world unchanged. Same sky, same trees, same crooked fence leaning toward the road. But something had shifted. The illusion of safety had cracked, just enough to let the truth slip through. Nowhere was safe. Not really. That evening, Lena didn't go to bed. She sat at the kitchen table writing by candlelight. When I asked what she was doing, she didn't look up. Keeping a record, she said, in case we forget what it felt like to be afraid and to keep going anyway. I didn't understand then that she was writing for the future. For people like me, years later trying to remember. But I do now. Summer arrived with a vengeance, hot, golden, almost defiant in its beauty. The roses bloomed like fire. Bees hummed in the clover. Children played in the stream, their laughter sharp and bright against the lingering dread. Life insisted on continuing, even when it felt like a betrayal. Father's letters came more often then, short, practical things, full of army jargon and coded reassurances. But between the lines, I read what he couldn't say. I miss your voice. I miss the way the light falls in the kitchen at dusk. I miss being your father, not just a name on a roster. I started writing my own letters in secret, folding them into tiny squares and tucking them into the hollow of the old oak by the mill. I never mailed them. They were for the sky to carry, not the post. In them, I told him about Thomas learning to whistle, about Mother's bread-winning first prize at the village fair, about how I'd finally managed to carve a proper bird, wings spread, beak open, as if mid-song. I'm keeping the world whole for you, I wrote once, until you come back to it. One afternoon, I found Thomas standing at the edge of the field, staring at the horizon where the bombers sometimes flew. He didn't turn when I joined him. After a long silence, he said, "Do you think they know we're down here?" I followed his gaze. The sky was empty, just blue, endless and serene. "I hope so," I said. "I hope they look down and see us planting gardens and mending socks and laughing in the stream. I hope they see we're still here." He nodded slowly. "Then maybe they'll remember why they're fighting." I didn't tell him I wasn't sure anyone was fighting for us. that sometimes it felt like we were just caught in the gears of something too big to understand. Instead, I picked a daisy and handed it to him. He tucked it behind his ear and smiled, a real smile, wide and sudden, like sunlight breaking through cloud. That night, I dreamed of Father. He was standing in a field of snow, looking up at the same sky we shared. He didn't speak, but he held out his hand, and in his palm was a single rose, its petals unfurled despite the cold. When I woke, my cheeks were wet. The next morning, I climbed the hill again. The sky was clear, the kind of blue that feels like a promise. I sat for a long time, watching clouds drift like slow thoughts across the heavens. And for the first time in months, I didn't ask the sky for anything. I just thanked it for the light, for the breath in my lungs, for the fragile, stubborn fact of us still here, still speaking, still hoping. Because hope, I was learning, wasn't a grand thing. It was a daisy behind the ear, a letter hidden in a barrel, a bird carved from ashwood, a voice whispering into the wind, certain someone was listening even if it was only the sky. The summer stretched on, long and honeyed, as if time itself had slowed to spare us. Days bled into one another like watercolors left in the rain. Soft edges, blurred hours, the same sun rising and setting over the same hills. We grew accustomed to the rhythm of absence. Father's letters came every fortnight, thin envelopes that smelled faintly of smoke and starch. We read them aloud at the table, then folded them back with care, as though the creases might wear the words away. Mother kept them in a biscuit tin lined with lavender next to her wedding ring, which she'd taken off just for now, she said. Though she never put it back on, Lena's lessons at the schoolhouse took on a new urgency. She taught the children not just arithmetic and grammar, but how to identify aircraft by their silhouettes, how to bandage a wound with torn sheets, how to stay calm when the world seemed determined to unravel. Courage isn't the absence of fear, she told them one afternoon, chalk dust catching in her eyelashes. It's doing what needs to be done while your knees are shaking. I watched from the doorway, unnoticed, and saw one of the younger boys nod solemnly, his small hands gripping the edge of his desk like it was the only thing keeping him from floating away. Thomas began to speak in full sentences, not many, and never loudly, but they came, clear and deliberate like stones dropped into a well. He asked questions about the stars, about why the river curved the way it did, about whether birds ever got lost. I answered as best I could, but often we'd just sit together in silence, watching swallows dip and rise above the wheat fields. He'd started sketching in a tattered notebook, trees, clouds, the curve of the church roof. Once he drew me, I didn't recognize myself at first, a boy with wide eyes and a mouth slightly open, as if caught mid-whisper. "That's how you look when you talk to the sky," he said simply. I kept that drawing tucked inside my shirt, over my heart. Then came the news from France. It arrived not with a telegram, but with a hush, a sudden stillness that fell over the village like a shroud. People spoke in lowered voices, avoided each other's eyes in the lane. The vicar's sermons grew shorter, grimmer. Even the cows seemed slower in their grazing. We didn't know details, not really, but we knew enough. Retreat, collapse, loss. The word evacuation began to circulate again. But this time, it wasn't children being sent away. It was the army, broken and weary, limping home across the channel. One evening, a stranger appeared at our gate. Not a soldier, not exactly, just a man in a mud-streaked coat, his face hollowed by exhaustion, his boots split at the seams. He asked for water. Mother gave him a mug and a slice of bread without a word. He drank slowly, his hands trembling, then looked up at us with eyes that had seen too much. "They're coming," he said quietly. "Not today, not tomorrow, but they're coming." He didn't say who they were. He didn't need to. That night, Lena burned her letters. I saw her from the stairs, kneeling by the hearth, feeding pages into the flames one by one. The firelight danced across her face, casting shadows that made her look older than her years. I didn't ask why. I already knew. Words were dangerous now. Hope was dangerous. Even memory could be a liability if it fell into the wrong hands. Afterward, she sat on the back step, wrapped in Father's old coat, staring at the moon. I joined her, careful not to make a sound. We sat like that for a long time, listening to the crickets, to the distant hoot of an owl, to the quiet pulse of the world, pretending everything was normal. "They'll take the church first," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then the school, then the houses. They always do." I didn't ask how she knew. She just did. The next morning we began to hide things. Not just letters, but photographs, diaries, anything that tied us to who we'd been. Mother buried the family Bible in the rose garden. Lena dismantled the wireless and buried its parts beneath the compost heap. I took my carved birds, my notebook, the drawing Thomas had made of me, and tucked them into the hollow of the old oak, deep enough that even the sharpest eyes wouldn't find them. As I covered the opening with moss and twigs, I whispered, "Keep them safe." Not to the tree, to the sky. The village changed after that. Curtains stayed drawn even during the day. Conversations happened in doorways, in whispers, cut short if a stranger passed by. Children were told not to play too far from home. The postman stopped whistling. Even the dogs seemed quieter, their barks muffled, as if they understood the new rules of survival. But life, stubborn thing that it is, kept pushing through. Mrs. Pembroke started baking again. Small loaves shared with neighbors under cover of dusk. Old Mr. Harrow repaired the church bell, though no one rang it. And Thomas? Thomas began planting flowers along the lane. Poppies, cornflowers, anything that would grow. "So they'll know we were here," he said when I asked why. "Even if they try to erase us." I started sleeping with my shoes on, not every night, just the ones when the wind carried strange sounds or when the silence felt too heavy. I'd lie awake, listening for boots on gravel, for engines in the distance, for the snap of twigs under unfamiliar feet. But mostly I listened for the sky. On those nights it felt closer, almost protective, a vast, dark blanket stretched over us, holding its breath. One afternoon, while helping Mother in the garden, I found a single white feather caught in the thorny stem of a rose bush. It was soft, impossibly light, still warm from the sun. I held it in my palm and thought of Father's last letter, where he'd written, "Sometimes I see a bird and think of you." I tucked the feather into my pocket next to the drawing and went back to weeding. The invasion never came, not to our village at least. The front moved elsewhere, east, then south, then back again, like a tide pulling and retreating. But the fear remained coiled in our bellies, ready to strike at the slightest sound. We learned to live with it, the way you learn to carry a stone in your shoe, uncomfortable but bearable as long as you keep walking. Autumn arrived with a sigh. Leaves turned gold and crimson, then drifted to the ground like embers. The air grew crisp, scented with wood smoke and apples. We harvested the victory garden, potatoes, carrots, onions, and stored them in the cellar, counting each one like a prayer. Rations grew tighter, shoes wore thin, but we shared what we had. A cup of tea, a blanket, a kind word. Those small things became lifelines. Lena stopped teaching at the school. The children were sent home, for their safety, the notice said. She spent her days mending clothes, preserving fruit, walking the perimeter of the village, as if she could hold it together with her presence alone. At night, she'd sit by the window, her silhouette sharp against the blackout blind, watching the dark. I missed the sound of children's voices in the lane. One evening, Thomas and I walked to the hill behind the church. The sky was streaked with pink and violet, the first stars pricking through the blue. We sat in silence for a long time, watching the light fade. Then he said, "Do you think they'll ever know what it was like, the ones who come after?" I thought about it. "Only if we tell them. But how?" "If we're gone?" I looked at him, really looked. His eyes were older than his years, but still held that quiet wonder, that stubborn spark. "Then we leave signs," I said. "Like the flowers you planted, like the birds I carved, like the stories we whisper into the wind," he nodded slowly. "The sky will remember." "Yes," I said. "The sky always remembers." Winter returned, colder this time, sharper at the edges. Frost-etched patterns on the windows each morning, intricate and fleeting. We burned less wood, wore more layers, huddled closer around the fire. Letters from father grew fewer, farther between. The last one came in December, just 3 lines, all well, thinking of you. Stay strong, no date, no signature, just those words, written in a hand that looked tired. Mother read it once, then tucked it into the biscuit tin without a word. That night, she baked a small loaf with the last of the flour and a spoonful of precious jam. For Christmas, she said, though there was no tree, no carols, no bells. We ate it by candlelight, the 4 of us, and for a moment it almost felt like before, almost. I turned 11 in January. No cake this time, not even a loaf. But Lena gave me a gift, a small leather-bound notebook, its pages blank and crisp. Write it down, she said. Everything. So it doesn't disappear. I didn't ask what it was. I knew our lives, our names, our quiet acts of resistance, planting flowers, sharing bread, whispering to the sky. That night, I wrote my first entry. Not a letter, not a story, just a record. Today, Thomas laughed. The roses survived the frost. The sky was clear, simple things, fragile things, but real. And in a world determined to erase us, real was the most dangerous thing of all. I still talk to the sky. Not as much as I used to. Life has a way of filling your mouth with other words, but sometimes, when the world feels too heavy, I look up and whisper, not for answers, not even for comfort, just to say, I'm still here. We're still here, and in the silence that follows, I hear it, the faintest echo, the softest breath, whispering back, I know. The year turned again, slow and stubborn, like a wheel grinding through mud. I was 11 now, not a child, not yet a man, but something in between caught in the hush of waiting. The war hadn't ended, but it had changed shape. It no longer roared at our doorstep. It hummed in the distance, a low thrum beneath the surface of daily life, like the sound of a river running underground. We learned to live with its presence the way you learn to live with a missing tooth, aware of the gap, but no longer startled by it. Father's letters stopped coming altogether, not with a final word, not with an explanation, just silence. 1 month passed, then 2. Mother didn't speak of it. She simply stopped setting a place for him at the table. Lena stopped mentioning his name. Even Thomas, who rarely missed a detail, never asked. We all understood. To speak of absence was to give it weight, and we couldn't afford that kind of gravity. Instead, we filled the silence with work. I helped Mr. Harrow at the forge, learning to shape iron with hammer and heat, my hands blistered and calloused, but steady. Thomas tended the flowers along the lane, now a riot of color even in winter. Pansies, snowdrops, hardy little things that refused to die. Lena took in sewing from 3 villages over, her needle flashing like a silver fish in the lamplight. And Mother? She began teaching the younger children in our kitchen, her voice soft but firm. Her lessons laced with stories of kings and constellations and brave girls who outwitted dragons. Stories are armor, she told them once. Wear them well. I kept writing in the notebook Lena had given me. Not every day, some days there was nothing worth recording, but often enough that the pages began to fill. Today the first swallow returned. Today Thomas planted lavender by the gate. Today I carved a new bird, this one with its head tilted as if listening. I didn't write about fear, not directly. But it was there, in the spaces between words, in the way I noted the direction of the wind, in the careful tally of potatoes left in the cellar, in the line I added one evening. No letter again. One morning in early spring, I found Thomas standing at the edge of the meadow, staring at the sky with his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He didn't turn when I joined him. After a while, he said, "Do you think he's still looking up?" I knew who he meant. I didn't answer right away. Above us, clouds drifted like slow ships across a blue sea. "I hope so," I said finally, "because I'm still looking up for him." He nodded, and that was enough. The village began to change in small, almost imperceptible ways. A new family moved into the cottage down the lane. Evacuees from Birmingham, their faces tight with grief, but their hands quick to help. The church roof, damaged in a storm the previous autumn, was patched with tin and tar. Someone started ringing the bell again, not for services but just once, every Sunday at dawn. A single clear note that hung in the air like a promise. And then, one day in May, the siren didn't sound. Not because there was danger, but because there wasn't. The air raid warden came round with a notice, drills suspended. For now, he added, but the way he said it made it sound like forever. That evening, for the first time in years, someone lit a lamp in their front window. Then another, and another. By nightfall, the village glowed like a constellation fallen to earth. We didn't celebrate, not openly. But in the quiet corners of our lives, joy flickered back to life. Mrs. Pembroke baked a proper cake, real sugar, real butter, and left slices on doorsteps. Old Mr. Harrow played his fiddle on the green, the notes thin but true. And Lena, she took down the blackout blinds. I helped her. One by one, we pulled the heavy fabric from the windows, folded it carefully, and stored it in the attic. When the last one came down, sunlight flooded the kitchen, golden, warm, almost shocking in its brightness. Mother stood in the middle of the room, her face turned toward the light, her eyes closed. She didn't cry. She just breathed, deep and slow, as if remembering how. That night I climbed the hill behind the church and lay on my back in the grass, watching the stars. They seemed brighter than before, as if they'd been holding their breath too. I whispered to them, not a plea, not a question, just a simple truth. We're still here. And for the first time in a long time, the sky felt like an answer. Summer came again, softer this time, gentler. The roses bloomed in wild profusion, spilling over the garden walls in clouds of pink and crimson. Bees hummed in the clover. Children played in the stream without flinching at every distant sound. Life didn't return to what it had been, it never does, but it found a new rhythm, a new kind of ordinary. I turned 12 in July. Lena gave me a pocket knife. Father's, she said. The blade was nicked, the handle worn smooth by years of use. He'd want you to have it, she said, her voice steady, though her eyes glistened. I held it in my palm, feeling its weight, its history. That night I carved a new bird, smaller, simpler, but with wings spread wide. I tucked it into the hollow of the old oak, next to the others. Thomas began talking about going back to London. Not with fear this time, but with a quiet curiosity. I want to see if my street is still there, he said one afternoon, as we sat by the stream. Even if the house isn't. I didn't ask what he'd do if it wasn't. I just nodded and handed him a smooth stone from the riverbed. For remembering, I said. He put it in his pocket without a word. The first real news of the war ending came on a Tuesday, not with fanfare, not with bells, but with a radio. Someone had reassembled the wireless, hidden it in the vicarage attic, and tuned it to the BBC. We gathered in secret, just a handful of us, huddled around the crackling voice that spoke of surrender, of peace, of a world finally exhaling. When it was over, no one cheered, no one cried. We just stood there, blinking in the dim light, as if unsure what to do with the sudden absence of dread. Later, walking home under a sky streaked with twilight, Lena took my hand. "It's over," she said softly. I looked up at the stars. "Is it?" She didn't answer. Maybe she didn't know. Peace, I was learning, wasn't a single moment. It was a slow unfurling, like a flower opening after a long frost. It was in the way Mother finally put her wedding ring back on, in the way Thomas smiled when he talked about the future, in the way Lena began humming again as she worked, but it was also in the silences, the ones that no longer felt heavy, but spacious, full of possibility. One evening I found Mother in the rose garden, kneeling in the dirt, her hands deep in the soil. She was planting something new, tiny green shoots I didn't recognize. "Lavender," she said when I asked, for remembrance. I knelt beside her and helped. The earth was cool and rich beneath my fingers. As we worked, she told me stories about Father, not the war stories, but the quiet ones, how he'd proposed under this very rose bush, how he'd once spent an entire afternoon trying to fix a broken birdhouse for me, how he used to sing off-key in the shower. I listened, memorizing every word, every inflection, storing them away like seeds for a future I couldn't yet imagine. That night I wrote in my notebook, "Today, Mother sang while she washed the dishes." It was the same song Father used to hum, simple things, ordinary things, but they felt like miracles. Autumn came again, painted in gold and rust. The harvest was good, better than expected. We shared what we had, as always, but this time there was enough to spare. Thomas left in October. He stood at the gate with a small suitcase and a scarf Mother had knitted him, his eyes bright but dry. "Write to me," he said. "I will," I promised. He hesitated, then pulled something from his pocket, a small folded drawing. It was the sky over our village, dotted with birds in flight. "For your collection," he said. I tucked it into my shirt, over my heart. "Thank you." He nodded, turned, and walked down the lane without looking back. I watched until he disappeared around the bend, then climbed the hill and sat in the grass, watching the clouds drift. For the first time I didn't whisper to the sky. I just sat with it companionably, like an old friend. Winter returned, but it felt different this time, softer, less threatening. Frost still etched the windows, but now it felt like decoration, not warning. We burned wood freely, wore fewer layers, left the curtains open during the day. And letters began to arrive again, not from Father, but from others, soldiers returning home, families reconnecting. Strangers reaching out across the ruins of what had been. One afternoon, a letter came with a London postmark. I recognized Thomas's handwriting instantly. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a pressed poppy. "My street is gone," he wrote, "but I found the park. The oak tree is still there. I left something for you in its hollow. Come see me when you can." I showed the letter to Lena. She read it slowly, then handed it back without a word. But that night, as I passed her room, I saw her sitting by the window, a map of London spread across her lap, her finger tracing the route from our village to the city. Spring came early that year. The snowdrops pushed through the frost in February, followed by crocuses, then daffodils. The world was waking up, and so were we. One morning I found Lena in the kitchen, packing a small bag. "I'm going to London," she said simply. I didn't ask why. I already knew. She needed to see what was left, to find the pieces of herself that had been scattered by the war, to stand in the places Father might have walked even if he never came home. "I'll come with you," I said. She shook her head. "Not yet, stay here. Keep watch." So I did. I tended the garden. I helped Mr. Harrow at the forge, I wrote in my notebook. And every evening I climbed the hill and looked east, toward the city, and whispered, "Come back soon." She returned 3 weeks later, thinner, quieter, but with a new kind of calm in her eyes. She didn't say much about what she'd seen, only that Thomas was well, that the oak tree still stood, that she'd left a letter for Father in its hollow. Just in case, that night we sat by the fire, the four of us, Mother, Lena, me, and the ghost of the man we loved. No one spoke. We didn't need to, because sometimes silence is the truest kind of homecoming, and the sky, vast and patient above us, held us all in its quiet blue gaze. Years have a way of folding into one another, like pages pressed in an old book, some crisp and clear, others blurred at the edges, softened by time and tears. I'm an old man now, though I still feel the boy inside me, barefoot in the dew-damp grass, whispering to the sky. He never left. He just learned to carry his questions more quietly. The war ended officially in the spring of '45, but endings, I've learned, are rarely so neat. Are stretched on in silence, in empty chairs at the table, in the way Mother still set out a cup for Father every morning long after hope had turned to habit. No telegram ever came. No body was returned. Just absence, clean, complete, and final in its own terrible way. We buried him in the churchyard beneath a simple stone, James Finch, beloved husband and father. 1903-1944, we chose the date ourselves. A guess wrapped in grief, but it gave us something to hold on to, a name, a place, a moment to kneel and speak to. Lena never married. She stayed in the village, taught at the school for 40 years, and every spring planted a new rosebush in the garden, red, white, yellow, one for every year he was gone. "So the earth remembers," she'd say. Thomas came back often, first as a young man with ink-stained fingers and a job at a newspaper, then as a father, then as a grandfather. He always brought seeds from London, strange flowers that shouldn't have grown in our soil but did, stubborn and bright. "Proof," he'd say with a wink, "that beauty can take root anywhere." I left eventually. Not far, just far enough to find my own voice. I became a woodcarver like my father, though I never called myself that aloud. I made birds mostly. Hundreds of them. Sparrows with tilted heads, swallows in mid-dive, owls with eyes closed as if dreaming. People bought them for mantelpieces and windowsills, never knowing they were holding fragments of a boy's prayers. I never signed them. They didn't need my name. They carried something older, something quieter. I still talk to the sky. Not every day, but often enough. On clear nights, I sit on the back step of my cottage, the same one Lena and I shared after Mother passed, and look up. The stars are fewer now, drowned out by streetlights and progress, but they're still there if you know how to look. And I do, I always have. The village changed, of course. The old forge is a cafe now. The schoolhouse is a community centre. The lane where Thomas planted poppies is paved and lined with parked cars. But the church still stands. The oak by the mill still stands. And the roses, the roses still bloom, wild and untamed, spilling over the garden walls like they're trying to tell the world a secret. Last spring, I took my great-granddaughter up the hill behind the church. She's 8, Lena's age when the war began, and has my father's eyes, clear, curious, unafraid. She asked why I always look up when we walk. "Because the sky listens," I told her. She frowned, thoughtful. "Does it answer?" I smiled, not in words. "But sometimes, if you're very still, you can feel it." She was quiet for a moment, then pointed to a cloud shaped like a bird in flight. "Maybe it's saying hello." "Maybe it is," I said. We sat there until the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, the same colors I'd watched as a boy, trembling with fear and wonder. And in that moment, time folded in on itself. I was 9 again, 10, 12, standing on the edge of a world that had cracked open and somehow kept turning. And I was here now, holding the hand of a child who would never know war, but who would carry its echoes in her bones, just as I carry them in mine. Memory is a strange thing. It doesn't live in photographs or letters or even in stone. It lives in the way a certain light falls across a room, in the smell of rain on dry earth, in the sound of a blackbird at dawn. It lives in the quiet acts of tending, gardens, wounds, hope. And it lives most of all in the stories we pass down, not as warnings, but as lifelines. I never found Father's body. I never knew exactly where or how he died. But I know this. He lived long enough to write that last letter, long enough to think of us. And in the end, that was enough. Because love isn't measured in years, but in moments, small, ordinary, luminous moments that outlast even the darkest nights. I still have the notebook Lena gave me. Its pages are yellowed now, the ink faded in places, but every word is legible. Today, Thomas laughed. Today, the first swallow returned. Today, I carved a bird with its wings open. I read it sometimes, not to mourn, but to remember how we survived, not with grand gestures, but with daily acts of faith, planting seeds in winter, sharing bread in silence, whispering to the sky when no one else was listening, and the sky, always the sky, listened. It still does. I've lived a long life, not an easy one, but a full one. I've known grief, yes, but also joy, deep, quiet joy that doesn't need fanfare to be real. I've held newborns and buried friends. I've watched seasons turn and wars begin and end and begin again. And through it all, I've kept speaking to the sky, not because I expect answers, but because the act itself is a kind of resistance, a refusal to be silenced, a declaration that even in the face of loss, we are still here, still watching, still hoping, still reaching upward. My hands are gnarled now, the skin thin as parchment, but they still know how to carve. Just last week I made a new bird, small, simple, with its head tilted as if listening. I gave it to my great-granddaughter. "For your collection," I said. She tucked it into her pocket over her heart, just as Thomas once did for me. And I knew then that the story wasn't ending. It was being passed on. The war took so much, lives, innocence, certainty. But it didn't take everything. It didn't take the roses. It didn't take the stream. It didn't take the sound of a child's laugh echoing across a sunlit field. And it didn't take the sky, vast, ancient, holding all of us in its silent blue gaze. I still see Father sometimes, not in dreams, but in flashes, in the way the light catches the edge of a cloud, in the curve of a bird's wing, in the quiet strength of my granddaughter's hands as she plants seeds in the garden. He's there, not gone, just changed, and maybe that's the truest kind of peace, not forgetting but remembering with love. Not erasing the pain, but letting it soften into something that can be carried, something that can be shared. So I keep speaking to the sky, to the stars, to the children who ask why I look up. And I tell them because someone has to remember. Someone has to say, we were here. We loved, we hoped, we kept going. And the sky in its endless, wordless way answers, I know it always has, and it always will.